Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the study. And before we begin, can you join me in a word of prayer? Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we invite your presence here this morning. We know you have something to say to us, and we just ask that we can have open hearts and minds to receive light into our darkened minds and heart. We know, Lord, that there are things that we need to see about ourselves and our relation to the events that occur around us, and also in our interactions with others. We just pray, Lord, that you can correct us in our understanding. Be with us now, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning again. So, did I share my screen? No, not yet. Okay, let's do that. Thought I had, but I guess I didn't hit the button properly. So we've been looking at 1 Samuel chapter 2. Just a quick sort of summary. Last week we made a suggestion that chapter 2 is a representation of the three angels' messages. We have verse 12 to 17 that represents the first angel's message, verses 18 and 19, the second angel, and 20 and 21, the third angel. And we applied it to our history. But in the last study, we sort of zoomed out a bit. That is, instead of applying it to our history, we were applying it to the broader range of the Adventist church. So I took some consideration regarding this. So we had the first part, of course, dealing with the sons of Belial, was that verse 12 to 17. And so we kind of need to look at this a little bit more in detail again. And then this one dealing with the ephod, this linen ephod, and this coat. So we spent some time dealing with that. And then we also had, I'm trying to remember some of this. So, and then this section here, the blessing of Elkanah and his wife. Now, so what I'll do is I'll look at this here. So I'll go switch the screen. So this is the chart I made. Now you can see I've doubled it because what I want to do is I want to do the chart on the bottom to deal with the same verses but apply it differently, whether that makes sense or not. So I'm not quite sure how to do this, but let's look at the chart itself. So we have 1 Samuel 2, verse 1 to 11. Now that's going to be Hannah's prayer, right? So we're saying that is that whole story of Hannah precedes December 21st, 2012. And then we have 1 Samuel 2, verse 12 to 17 represents 2012 to 2017. And that's 1,737 days for that period of time. Whether that's significant, I just put the number there. And then September 23rd, 2017, that's going to be a presentation I did at Lambert Church in which I present July 18th as a symbol of the prediction before midnight, because that's something we were talking about in 2017, had to do with Samuel Snow's letters. So initially we knew Samuel Snow had his first letter that was published on February 22nd, 1844. And Tabo, well, it was actually Blessings who discovered the May 2nd letter, his second letter of Samuel Snow prior to midnight. And so Tabo touted that as the symbol of the prediction before midnight. And then I continued to study and look and find that there was actually two other letters. There was the June 22nd letter, which was Pentecost letter, and also a July 18th letter that was published on July 18th, 3 days before midnight. And Tabo had suggested that 3 days was a symbol of the prediction before midnight. Also, I noticed that his first letter was originally published on February 22nd, but it was written on February 16th. in 1844, published 6 days later in the Midnight Cry. And then it was republished in the Signs of the Times on April 3rd in 1844. April 3rd was the Passover according to the Jews in 1844. And May 2nd was the correct Passover according to October 22nd being the 10th day of the 7th month. So we had this, probably should bring up that diagram, I guess. But anyway, that structure of Samuel Snow's letters, and we'll probably look at that in a little bit more detail as we deal with some of these other dates, because there's going to be more dates put on this line on the top that relate to that line. And so we're trying to understand exactly how this line relates to Millerite history. But that means that the line below should have some relation to Millerite history. Does that make sense to people? That we can take these dates in our history and we can line them up with Millerite history below. Does that makes sense?
That would seem logical.
Okay. Now we know in Millerite history, the first and second angel's messages, we're going to have the third angel's message arrives October 22nd, 1844, right? Now, in every reform line, we have a first angel arrive, we have a formalization of a message, we have an empowerment of that message, and then the next message arrives, right? So in Millerite history, we have the first angel arrives 1798. It's going to be formalized when Miller is ordained as a minister, right? And then in 1833, and then it's going to be empowered August 11th, 1840. The second angel arrives on the first disappointment, April 19th, 1844. It's formalized when the Midnight Cry is given on July 21st, and then it's empowered at Exeter on August 15th. And then the third angel arrives October 22nd, 1844. And we know that the third angel, when it arrives, that it's never empowered in any line, right? So that message, there's always a falling away that occurs after the arrival of the third message. And this is something that this movement has known for a long, long time before I came into the movement. And they used to have these lines drawn out in a little bit more detail than we later drew them out. We would sort of just put the highlights, but they would always have, increase of the message. There would always be a number 7 associated with the third angel arriving. They have the work of the enemies, revival. They would have all these different things in these lines, which we generally leave out. So in our history, when we're looking at this line, we're looking at this message regarding Samuel. We're saying that Samuel is a message, right? A specific message in our line, in our history. We're applying it that way. But it would also represent, as all reform lines do, they all can be parallel with each other. And the primary reform line, of course, is Millerite history. And so in every reform line, there is a period of darkness, right, that precedes a reform line. And a reform line always addresses that particular darkness. And we saw this, of course, in detail when we went through understanding the lines. And we could see that in each sort of story, it's like an anatomy book where you have the different transparencies that go over top of each other to build, the human body. And that's sort of what these lines are like. Each story gives us more detail and adds different elements to our understanding of that history. So if we're going to address this story in Samuel chapter 2, we would have to say that there is some particular light that this story illustrates, and that it is a response to some particular type of darkness. Now, the fact that we have these sons of Belial, Hophni and Phinehas, and that they're part of this story, and exactly how we're going to deal with this, I don't know. Like how we're going to sort through exactly what this is telling us. We have some hints and ideas that this is about the movement and its inability to recognize its true spiritual condition, and that God has given us this message in relation to time to reveal that to the movement. Does that all seem reasonable so far?
Yes.
Okay. And so when we constructed this line, or I did actually, I put this line up not during a study, but in between our studies. I We had said that, well, we have these verses. Verse 12, chapter 2, verse 12 represents 2012, and chapter 2, verse 21 represents 2021, and that there's some kind of correlation between these verse numbers and these years. And we did the similar thing in Judges chapter 2, which means also the fact that it's chapter 2 relates to the second angel's message, but also it was in 20, right? The 20s, 2001, Judges chapter 2, verse 1 represented 9/11 in 2001, and it went up to 2023, and it related specifically to the history we were in at that time. Now, we also note that this is an application that God gives us for us to understand at the present time. It's not the application of these verses. So for somebody who's not a part of this movement, and they, see us dealing with these lines and as if, this is what these verses only mean, well, obviously that's not our position. So we're looking for light for our feet. And that may be a little bit of myopia on our part, but I believe it's in God's providence that He's led us in this way to understand these verses. But we also need to understand them in the larger context, that is, how they relate to the bigger lines of Millerite history, and also just in their original reform line, right? We need to understand that there is a reform that was occurring at that time as well. So that bigger context gives us light regarding how we are making our application, right? That is, we understand that we first need to see how this relates to that history. What is the story? And in this story, one of the things that we saw is that there is this thread of the everlasting gospel that relates to the promised seed. And so this prayed for child relates to those seeking to have a Christ-like character. Does that make sense to people?
That was a long sentence sort of thing.
It's an interesting thought.
It does make sense.
Okay. Yeah, it's just we have this promised seed. The seed of the woman would bruise the serpent's head. The serpent would bruise his heel. That's the everlasting gospel, right? And we know that the everlasting gospel is the three-step testing prophetic message that develops and demonstrates two classes of worshipers. So when we are studying the scriptures, we're not studying this for some sort of curiosity about, events that are going to happen so that we can predict things. This is about us wanting to develop a Christ-like character, that Christ can be born in us. And so the women who always are expecting that their child that they're going to have is going to be the promised seed is an important detail of the everlasting gospel, important thread of the everlasting gospel. And Bible chronology, the whole reason that we are given Bible chronology is actually to follow through that promised seed, right? So the history of the Bible is about the story of the everlasting gospel.
The thought that comes to my mind when you're talking about it, that promised seed is kind of like when we're searching the scriptures, we're looking for that to, I don't know, to be brought out in brought out in the scriptures in our lives for the promised seed of Christ.
Yep.
As we search scripture.
Yeah. Now it may seem a little bit abstract to some people, I think, There's some people are a little more concrete thinkers, but if we think about each of these stories in Scripture, we can see that if we go back to Abraham, we have he's called out of Babylon, right, to go to the land of promise. And he's given a promise in regard to this covenant regarding the seed. His seed would be as the stars of heaven. Now, so that promise, that that inheritance, that is the promise of the promised seed, is Abraham's the one chosen for that seed to come from. And then, of course, Isaac is going to carry that on, and then Jacob. And then Jacob divides that birthright among his 12 sons, so that Joseph gets the double portion, Levi gets the priesthood, and Judah gets the kingship, right? And then we follow through how Israel now is, in a sense, the promised seed, right? As a whole, even though only 3 of the sons get that, but Christ, he's going to be a priest after the order of Melchizedek rather than Levi or the Aaronic priesthood, right? But he's still going to receive the kingship because the scepter shall not depart from Judah. And so it's going to be David, who is of the tribe of Judah, who's going to be this king it's typifying Christ, right? A man after his own heart, God says, right? And Christ is going to be the son of David. So his genealogy is going to be followed through and through the kings of Judah. And then the scepter, it says, will not depart from Judah until Shiloh come. But we know that in the captivity, the Babylonian captivity, eventually Babylon is going to conquer the kings of Judah, and he's going to overturn it. That is, from Babylon taking it, it's going to be overturned to Medo-Persia, overturned to Greece, overturned to Rome, and then he shall come whose right it is, right? So we're going to see that there's this overturning that happens, and then Christ is going to become king, but still, even though he's the King of glory when he enters into heaven, he doesn't assume his role as the king until after the work of being a priest, right? So there's a lot of complexity. There's lots of these lines that are not generally understood, or at least put together in any sort of cohesive way. So this movement has been able to do this, and we're still in the process of figuring some of this out, all of the details. But the idea that we have here is that there is something being illustrated about this movement, and the main thing that we see in relation to the movement has to do with our lack of the character of Christ. So it's related to this line, but then we have to say, well, that's what happens in the story of Samuel, this child that's going to be born, these sons of Belial, and then this, obviously, this second angel's message dealing with Samuel and the ephod and his coat that his mother makes for him, and then the blessing that Elkanah and his wife receive in having 3 sons and 2 daughters. And so we have to try to figure out how that all fits together. And I've thought about it. I don't think I have any of those answers yet. But when we were dealing with it on Thursday, how were we addressing this whole issue with the church itself? Where were we placing this history, the sons of Belial, in relation to the church? Does anybody remember what we did? What we were saying on Thursday?
How are we applying the sons of Belial to the leadership of the church current day? Is that?
Yeah, because we were talking about, well, we were applying it in some way to, so we were applying it first to a line that had to do with our big line. So this line that you see here in front of you, even though it's doubled, it's the same line. this line here is just dealing with this movement, but we did apply it to 1989, 9/11, etc. Right? So we applied it. We zoomed out a little bit into our line that parallels Millerite history. We haven't applied it to Millerite history yet, but I'm suggesting that we would have to do that. Exactly how we're going to, but that's how we were addressing it on Thursday. So nobody particularly remembers. I know I don't remember all the details.
So, question in short form again, just say it.
Well,
You're asking,
how were we applying it? Does anybody remember how we were applying this line, this story of Samuel, to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in our history? Because we were covering that history.
oh, isn't it what you just said, like 1989 and 9/11?
But exactly where were we putting the sons of Belial? Did we deal with the ephod? I don't think we completed that, right? So
Yeah,
we kind of started on it, and so hang a second here. So nobody remembers anything. I mean, I know I don't remember all the details of what we discussed.
I'm not recalling anything clearly.
So you're asking basically how the story of Eli and Samuel and so on applies to the church.
Okay. I'm just looking through the transcript here because we were actually moving a little bit further ahead. We were dealing with Eli because we were reading lots of Spirit of Prophecy, at least some of it. And let me see here. I should have gone over my video again. Right. So we dealt with what happened with the church in regard to 9/11 and some of the corruption within the church as a parallel to the sons of Belial, right? That was basically the idea. That's where we spent quite a bit of time because we read Spirit of Prophecy in that regard. And then we talked about tithe, right?
Yeah.
10th being a remnant from Isaiah chapter 6. And then we dealt with the ark and the two tables, right? So we dealt with the idea that and that's going to be later on that we're going to look at that. So we were talking about how glory has departed.
I'm wondering how it fits in with the scholars. I don't know how many now, but and how far it's reached even to the Biblical Research Institute, perhaps, of the questioning of, well, our prophetic understanding, like Neil Wilson saying that way back that the beast being the Catholic Church is an old understanding, belongs in the trash heap or something like that, or more recent scholars denying the 2300 days.
Yeah, well, and it's not
just
so much
amazing.
the scholarship. It would just be people who graduate from our institutions.
Right.
Don't believe
the scholars are teaching those.
Yeah,
the scholars are teaching those.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is still a conservative class of scholars within Adventism, but they've been slowly eroding the prophetic foundation. So obviously, you're not going to have many scholars accepting the pioneer understanding of Revelation 9. I only know of two scholars that
those scholars we know. Sorry, we know that those scholars, that there's good men that God still has.
Yeah, but it's
they
not
seem
even
to be like dumb dogs that aren't barking, because I don't hear much protest over the idea that there's no 2300 days.
Yeah. So, but just dealing with Revelation 9, so you have Ron Dupree and Trevier. There's two Adventist scholars that support Revelation 9 as the pioneer's understanding, at least on some level. so that we have August 11th, 1840. But the vast majority of scholars don't accept the pioneer understanding of the trumpets, right? Which would include, of course, Revelation 9, the fifth and sixth trumpet, which
When
is
would you say that changed?
well,
Did most of Adventism accept that?
the
August
change.
11, 1840, up until
Well, I
when?
mean, it was it happens gradually. So, um,
Mhm.
through after definitely after 1957, we saw more and more that people who were rejecting prophetic messages, the foundation, became more and more brazen. So it's not like it just happened in one day. It happens gradually over time. It's not like scholars change their minds. It's just new generation comes along and questions the teachings of the previous generation. And so a foundation is laid in Adventist education. So a lot of our scholars, were raised Adventists. And so it's just gradually creeps in generation after generation. And so the fourth generation forgets the first generation.
Mhm.
Right? And that's what's happened in Adventism. So that's why the fourth generation as a symbol. 1957 marks the beginning of the fourth generation. And the reform line always occurs in the fourth generation. So there's a lot of information that we would have to that we still are addressing that we haven't addressed, right? So we deal with the sons of Belial. Now, in some ways, because we're going to have in this bigger line, we're going to have Saul, David, and Solomon representing the three angels' messages, right? Those three kings who each reigned for 40 years in a period of 120 years. And, so we can see a parallel, for instance, between the sons of Belial and Saul, right? So we're going to see lots of different parallels. This is going to be a very interesting study going through Samuel. But can we see that the sons of Belial to some degree represent Saul's ministry, right? The first angel's message.
How so? Like, I see how Saul fell through spiritualism. Would it have anything to do with
Yeah,
spiritual formation coming into the church? Any connection there, you think?
well, no. No. See, that's where we're going to have to sort out these lines, exactly what we're looking at. So what ends up happening with the lines is we know that we have this bigger line that goes right from creation to, from the creation of the earth, heaven and earth, to the new heaven and earth. And then each of these waymarks, there's 7 major waymarks, and then we can zoom into a waymark, and then we have uh, other reform lines, right, which all have waymarks. And then we zoom into those waymarks, and there's other reform lines. So it's like a fractal. You just keep zooming in, and you still get the same pattern again and again. So we have to look at each aspect of a line. What is the prominent ideas within a line? But we know that Saul's going to have his own reform line, and David has his own reform line, and Solomon has his. So Saul, David, and Solomon each have their own reform lines.
In
Right?
those fractals, do you notice anything that would line up with Fibonacci sequence at all?
Yeah.
The fingerprint
Mm-hmm.
of God in creation.
Yeah. Well, we have that in dealing with the 220 years of from 677 to 457 BC. There's periods of 70 years, and then we had, so that's going to give you pi. Like if you take 220 divided by 70 is pi. That is the smallest fraction that approximates pi is 22 divided by 7. And then we had the Fibonacci sequence dealing with, I'm trying to remember exactly how we did that. That was back in 2016 when I looked at that. Stephen might remember how we worked the Fibonacci sequence, though. But we have Fibonacci showing up in other ways. So the
I'm
Fibonacci,
thinking of the lines. Like, is that what you're referring to?
yeah, yeah,
How the lines work?
well, yes. So are they a Fibonacci sequence all the time? No. I mean, but
No, but
it's,
do we see it in places? I guess as we zoom in to us, I don't know. I don't know.
yes,
Just
yeah, we do. So it's 1.618, right? That's the Fibonacci number. Let's see what I'm here.
sounds familiar. I don't remember
Yep,
it as a decimal.
here in my chart. But we had it dealing with Peter. So that's going to be, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I can't remember right now. It
Matthew,
shows again and again. Stephen?
Matthew 16:1-8.
Yeah, Matthew 16 verses 18.
Yes. So you have what, the 1618?
Yep. And that's going to be when Jesus is talking to Peter. And we know that the name Peter, if we take the letters of Peter and we multiply the gematria, we get 144,000 or something. Is that what it is? I'm trying to remember.
Oh, you just take the letters as they are in the English alphabet.
Yeah.
So P, what's 18, is it, or 16? And
Yeah.
then you have the P being 16 and then the R being 18 as well. The name Peter.
Okay. Yeah. So Peter starts with the 16 and ends with an 18 because P is the 16th letter and R is the 18th letter. But if you multiply them together, you get 144,000, right? Is that what it is? The name Peter?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And that's in Matthew 16:18. But there's tons of other places where we run into this symbol. I just can't remember them all at the moment. And of course, we know that this is where it says the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. This is actually in Paneum, right? And that's referred to as the gates of hell. So upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So there's lots of different things. There's lots of different threads that we could go down, different lines. But the main thing here is that we can take these lines and we can zoom out, right? So we can zoom out, we can zoom in. We're going to see the same thing. And so it can be confusing because we have multiple reform lines. And what we did when we went through understanding the lines is we were able to differentiate them. We were able to pull them out of the structures. And we did that through the various symbols that were being used, sometimes gematria, sometimes the Strong's numbers. They would give us spans of times and dates in various ways that would confirm our analysis that we had already derived from the verses themselves. So in Saul, we're going to see that Saul is going to have a reform line, but we have right now a reform line dealing with Samuel in chapter 2. And so when we went through Judges, remember that we had said that in the book of Judges, it was going, once we got to chapter 2, we recognized it was going to illustrate the history of this movement from 9/11 to 2023. And we kept finding that to be the case. So when we examined each judge was a reform line, and it was basically miraculous to discover those structures, right? So we're not going to go back and look at those now, but anybody who wants to can go back and look at. One is we have a paper on it. There's two different papers, I guess. There's the notes from the prophecy school that we had at the conference at Telford Muse. So there's videos on that. But there's also papers on my academia site. One is the notes for that. And also I just, like Dwight did presentations, Stephen did presentations, Iran, and I did. But also just my notes are also in academia as a separate set of notes that deal with all of those lines. So we're going to be finding something similar. That is, what we have here is we have this initial template, and we believe that the book of Samuel, First Samuel more specifically, maybe First and Second Samuel, I guess. They're going to cover all of that history of they're going to cover what does Second Samuel cover? How far does it go? That's what I'm trying to remember. Just up to David, right? Yeah. Yeah. So in Samuel, we're going to get Samuel, we're going to get Saul, and we're going to get David, but that's as far as Samuel goes. It's not going to go into Solomon. That's where you're going to get kings, right? When you get Solomon. Okay. So even though we're starting here with Samuel's not going to cover all of this history. We have to do First and Second Samuel, and then First Kings, at least part of First Kings, dealing with Solomon.
So,
but
since we're going in this with Samuel, where we go with the kings, Saul, David, Solomon.
Yeah.
Is that a mirror image of what we've seen with the church?
I don't know what you mean by a mirror image. You have to explain what you mean by a mirror here. I don't.
Saul was a king that was not dependent on God. He was more self-seeking. David was wholly dependent on God. Solomon was later. So we have.
Are you saying a mirror or a parallel? I see a parallel. I don't see a mirror.
Okay.
So you need to explain the mirror part of it.
I was looking at mirror, but it wouldn't work if Solomon is going to be in Kings.
Yeah, well, he's in the book of Kings, yeah. So what we're going to get to when you get to the end of Second Samuel is we're going to have David is going to do that census, right? That's as far as it's going to go in Second Samuel. It's just to the census, and then we got to get to there. There's a lot of stuff in Second Samuel. So it's going to go through all of the problems with David, Nathan rebuking David. Not sure why it's all in Second Samuel, because Samuel's gone by then, but that's how the books are named. Yeah, so there's lots of things that this is going to be a pretty detailed study. It's going to take us a long time just to get through First Samuel, and then we got Second Samuel. Now Second Samuel is going to deal with, David. So First Samuel deals with Saul, Second Samuel deals with David. First Kings is going to deal with the end, of David, but basically it's going to be Solomon, right? So it's going to be about Solomon. And then halfway through, it's going to be the end of Solomon, and you're going to have Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and then all the kings that go up to basically the time of Ahab. And then Second Kings is going to go from Ahab all the way to Zedekiah, right? And then Chronicles is going to go through all of that history, right from basically the whole history of the Bible up until the end of Zedekiah. So it's going to cover that whole history, First and Second Chronicles, right? So we're going to have some repetition. Whether we're going to go through First and Second Chronicles or not, I don't know. I think probably it depends on how long before Jesus comes back, because this takes us a long time. So we just don't know where we're going to go. But the main point that I'm trying to get here as we start to look at this is that we have something that applies to our line, but we already were zooming out on Thursday. That is, we're looking at how this applied to the church, because it was pretty evident that it applies to the church. But if it applies to our bigger line, from November 9th, 1989 to, the Sunday law, the end of time and close of probation and all those things, if it applies to that, then it also applies to Millerite history. And so the question is, how are we going to sort out these lines as we did in the book of Judges, right? So where are our lines? And that means our line, this line that we have here on the screen, is a zoom into a waymark, right? So we found that this movement basically is a zoom into 9/11. That all of this stuff that we had dealing with July 18th was zooming into the arrival of the second angel's message in our history, which is 9/11. And that we have not come to midnight on the line that Jeff had created back in 2016, where we have 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law. Now we've approached and can't come to midnights and midnight cries in smaller reform lines, but that on that line, we're not to midnight yet. Not that we know of. We haven't reached midnight. And for somebody, watching this, because I'm trying to go through this for people who are just watching this series and haven't gone through the other series in details, that, this waymark of midnight is when a message has been formalized. And I'm of the opinion that our message has not been formalized yet. It hasn't been given, because that message has to be given to the church. Because between midnight and the midnight cry, Adventism, that is not the organizational structure, but the Levites, right? They will receive this message and proclaim it. Now, it will be empowered at some point, which is the midnight cry. And that's going to precede the Sunday law itself, right? So within Adventism, we have this reform line. Now, there still is a bigger reform line. So Ellen White compares the midnight cry in Millerite history to the loud cry in our history. I'm just going to go back through some of these lines. I don't know how to find this here, but let's go back somewhere. Okay, here. Okay, that's in Judges. Yeah, there's tons of diagrams, and I need to organize these and get them a little more. Let me see here if I can find a simple line. Boy, there was Moses line. There's line to the right. Okay, so this is what I want. Okay, so when we look at this line at the bottom, I have Abraham's line there. But we can see that in Millerite history, we have 1798, increase of knowledge, the struggle that goes on that we were using in connection with how we were studying that line. 9/11, 18. No, this isn't the one I want. This was, Miller's personal line. I don't want Miller's personal line. Okay. We have the cosmic line. Let me see. Noah. We went through his Abraham. Cosmic line, literal Israel. Yeah. Boy, it should be back here somewhere. You can see there's a lot of slides here. Way too many. Well, this one might work. Okay, so here we have Millerites, Protestants, Millerites. So the top line there is our simple line, 1798, 1833, August 11th, 1840. Then we have April 19th at sunset, right? Because midnight is going to be halfway between sunset and the Sunday law or the close of probation, right? Now, Ellen White parallels the midnight cry to the loud cry. Now, this still isn't quite the right diagram, but the one above. Yeah, this one might just be better. Okay, so yeah, this is the line I want. Okay, So we can see Millerite history there. I have that little Samuel Snow's letters there from February 16th to July 18th, and then the 3 days before midnight. And then below, you see our line. The time of the end's 1989. It parallels 1798. 1996, the formalization of the message parallels 1833. And 9/11, as the arrival or the empowerment of the first angel's message, parallels August 11th, 1840. So that's the restraint of Islam. And then you have 9/11 also representing the arrival of the second angel's message in this line. And we can see that the midnight cry in this line, we're lining up within this movement, right? So this all precedes the Sunday law. But this is still a zoom into a line, because Ellen White parallels the midnight cry with the loud cry, and the loud cry comes after the Sunday law. But here we have the midnight cry, just as in Millerite history, preceding the Sunday law. So this was a confusion within the movement that existed, right? Because we know that the second angel joins the third angel at 9/11, and it swells into a loud cry. And Ellen White parallels the loud cry with the midnight cry. So are people understanding what I'm saying?
Restate that, please.
Okay, so here I'm showing that this line where we have Seventh-day Adventists and Levites, this is the line that Jeff had, but this is not the line that Ellen White had. That is our line at the bottom. Ellen White never has this line. She's going to have, this is the line that Ellen White has. She has the close of probation, October 22nd, 1844, right? As the arrival of the third angel's message. And then we're going to have the second angel arrive and join the third angel, right, at the Sunday law, right? We have their fourth angel's message, but that's the second angel joining. She doesn't have it happen at 9/11. She has it happen at the Sunday law.
Right.
And then the loud cry follows, and then the close of probation. Okay, so this is Ellen White's line, correct? This is how we would understand it as Seventh-day Adventists. There's no nine. What?
I would have to agree.
Okay. So when we have this line that this movement developed through Jeff is going to have this midnight cry precede the Sunday law. Midnight cry then. So that means all of this history that we see here is a zoom into the Sunday law itself, right? Because the parable of the 10 virgins has been fulfilled and will be fulfilled to the very letter, right? So the parable of the 10 virgins is the first and second angel's messages. And in our history, in order for the third angel's message to be empowered, the second angel has to arrive and join it, right? The mighty angel of Revelation 18, which is the second angel's message. And you can't have a third without a first and a second. So that means the first angel's message also had to arrive in our history. And so we can see that it arrived in 1989. And so that is the history of the first and second angel's messages in our time. But in our time, because it parallels Millerite history, we have a midnight cry that precedes the Sunday law, just as there was a midnight cry that preceded the close of probation. So this midnight cry in our line is not the loud cry. And that was a confusion within this movement that was never clear. So Jeff, he originally would talk about how the midnight cry parallels the loud cry, but then he said that we have a midnight cry in our history, which precedes the Sunday law. And he never really differentiated this. He just saw it all as part of the same thing. And in a sense, it is. But something happens first within Adventism so that we can pass the Sunday law test and give the loud cry. So the whole purpose of this movement and this understanding is to give a message to Seventh-day Adventists that we can stand at the Sunday law. So So what God has given this movement is a part of that. Now that seems sort of pretty bizarre or extreme to say that us few people here on this study are part of this message that's supposed to reform the Seventh-day Adventist Church, right? It seems kind of preposterous, actually, that any of us could have any part.
I was going to say big, but preposterous is the big word for big. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But this is what has been shown to us. Now, sometimes, in my ponderings of all of this, especially early on, even before this movement, I'd say, well, why does God show me anything? Well, it's probably just for me, right? Like, do other people have to understand everything that I understand or understand it in a way? Or maybe it's just God speaking to me and helping me in my Christian walk, that he shows me certain things. So I've never had the position, that everybody has to listen to me. And I still don't have that position, right? I mean, I don't, that would be sort of, I don't know, preposterous. God takes care of his truth. He raises up whoever he wants and he does whatever he wants. And so it's not for me to kind of know how God's going to unfold history. But I have to study the scriptures for myself. And the fact that this movement ended up taking a date that I had come to understand and proclaiming it got international attention, sort of leads to the view that maybe, this is somehow useful, what I had done with chronology and studying the Bible, that there's some use in it and that God is going to use it in some way. But I'm not of the position that that's the only, that we're the only instruments that God is using to prepare the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It'll be interesting to see how all this comes together. But we do know that the understanding of Millerite history is extremely important, and that this movement has unsealed the seven thunders. That is, we're the only people I know of that understand Millerite history. And Kelly and I know Peter Plum, and he keeps attacking this understanding of Millerite history. He doesn't believe in July 21st, 1844 as being midnight. He just believes in Exeter, as somehow the midnight cry is given only at Exeter, right? He doesn't like the midnight waymark. He believes that that's an error. And he wrote a paper on it. I responded to it. He never responded to any of my arguments that I showed him why his paper was wrong. But I believe that we understand this history. I don't think we can dismiss Samuel Snow's letters or July 21st, Boston, or August 15th at Exeter and say that these are inconsequential, especially in their relationship to 457 BC and the symbols there, right? So that's a whole other study. But what we can say is that this movement has these waymarks of Raphia and Paneum and the Sunday Law that we have not yet reached. And you can see on the bottom there, we have 2014 to July 18, 2020. I didn't put the 2020 there, as this prediction before midnight.
When you refer to a date and so on, to help me follow on the chart, can you just point at it with your cursor? Because I find myself scanning back and forth and I kind of lose focus.
So on the bottom here, we have from 2014 to July 18, 2020. This is where we have the prediction before midnight. That's how we've marked it. That is, we could maybe even put it earlier, than 2014, but that's how we marked it here on this chart. So that includes 11.9, and we could actually zoom in and create a whole line dealing with that. And that's kind of what we're addressing here in this story of Samuel, is that history. But you can see we have a waymark called midnight, which is typified by Raphia, and another waymark called the midnight cry that's typified by Paneum, right? So the second angel formalized and the second angel empowered. And we are not to Raphia yet on that line. We have passed Raphias in other lines where we zoomed in. because we look at January 6th, 2021 as Raphia. But that's a zoomed in line. But there is this bigger line. And that line we haven't got to midnight yet. So when people in this movement talk about, well, the Sunday law is just around the corner, but we haven't passed Raphia or Panium yet. That is, can we have the Sunday law before this message is given to the Seventh-day Adventists, and that there is a reformation, a midnight cry amongst Seventh-day Adventists?
No.
No, it can't, right? So for people saying, well, the Sunday law is going to come under Trump, he's going to become president of the Sunday law. Well, that would mean that Raphia and Panium have to occur prior to that. Now, there are ways in which they've tried to do that. But because they're going to say, well, we passed midnight. Well, if we pass midnight, where's the message? And where's the midnight cry going to be, right? So that's part of what we've found as we've studied, is that there is a lot of things that still have to occur prior to there being a Sunday law. And that people in this movement who want to have a Sunday law, next week or whatever, wherever they're going to put it, putting dates on a line, looking for the Sunday law coming, they're making the same error that Parminder made when he predicted the Sunday law back in 2012. He said there was going to be a Sunday law in 2014. That is, it's a misapplication of chronology, of numbers, of symbols, right? That is, the problem is we need to know what line we're in. And we believe that time exists in our line as a witness against us, not as a predictive element, right? We can't predict anything in the future in relation to time. But time does exist as a witness. One is against us, but also as a witness to where we are in history, right? So that we're passing these waymarks and we can identify them. So we kind of know where we are, but we don't know when these events will occur in the future. So we can't have a date for like when Raphia is going to occur, when this midnight waymark, or when the midnight cry waymark is going to occur, or the Sunday law, because Ellen White says we can't know. And I've maintained that all through this history, right? So all through this time that this movement has been time setting, I've continually presented Ellen White statements that we can't know these events, so that whatever these events we were predicting as July 18th, it couldn't be any of these events. July 18th could not have been these major events that Ellen White talks about on her line, right? That is, we can't know the time for the close of probation, the Sunday law, the loud cry, or any other promise of special significance, right? Now, we have a work of watching and waiting, she says. Now, watching and waiting, I believe, is connected to measuring the time. That is, watching and waiting isn't just closing your eyes and going about your day-to-day life and saying, well, one day the Sunday law will happen, right? Watching and waiting is what we are doing, right? By looking at events as they unfold and connecting them into these structures, line upon line. So is that all making sense to people? I mean, I know we've gone through a lot of this before, but Kelly, hasn't. He wasn't there when we were doing these studies on judges.
What you've said so far makes sense, especially the part about Ellen White and people trying to get ahead of things.
Yeah.
They're getting ahead of themselves.
Yeah. So when we look at this line of Ellen White's and we see that Sunday law waymark, that is our history. We are in the history of the Sunday law on Ellen White's line. The Sunday law hasn't arrived, but the mighty angel of Revelation 18 has arrived, and she connects that with the Sunday law. So that means when we look at our lines and we see, this here down at the bottom, this parallel of Millerite history, this is a zoom into 9/11 as the arrival of the second angel's message. That is, there's obviously things that preceded it because you needed the first angel's message to occur prior to 9/11. But we are really in the second angel's message. That is, the mighty angel of Revelation 18 arrived at 9/11. And so that means we're in the time of the Sunday law. But we now, as you come into, when you're driving towards a city, you see it on a map, it's just like a dot, right? But as you drive in, you start to see these signs, these waymarks, right? As you enter into that city. And that's what we see as we approach the Sunday law. We see these waymarks that are just an unfolding of previous waymarks. They're a parallel. And so we can tell where we are at by these waymarks, by these signposts. So we can know that we're not at Raphia yet, that we're not at midnight, because if we were, there would be a message right now being given to Seventh-day Adventists by this movement, and it would soon be empowered that, people would be taking up this message and proclaiming it to Seventh-day Adventists, and that this message would prepare Seventh-day Adventists to pass the Sunday law. And the joining of the two sticks is supposed to occur between midnight and the midnight cry. And that's going to be the Protestants joining us. So there's a lot that happens. Raphia is not some minor event. It's something, and you could say, well, it was fulfilled on January 6th and in 2021. Well, it was in one line, but that was a smaller line. That was a zoom into a line within this movement, dealing with what we were making predictions regarding July 18th and December 25th and Trump and so forth. So those were fulfilled, but that was not this bigger line. Because in 2016, Jeff had 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law as these dates that you see above in Millerite history: April 19th, July 21st, August 15th, and October 22nd. And we kept saying, when are we going to get to midnight? And we would think we passed midnight, or we got to the midnight cry. But those were internal lines. They were not part of this line. So we're still not to midnight. Because if we were at midnight, we would be Samuel Snow at Boston proclaiming it's midnight, right? He's at Boston at midnight, right? He rides up on the horse to Boston, not to Exeter. He gets there for the Sunday service, right? And he has just a short message to say, right? So I don't know how long his message was. We have an abbreviated version of it in Loughborough, which Loughborough places at Exeter, but it's actually at Boston. And he puts Exeter at July. So he gets that it's in July, but he puts Exeter at July. Anyway, I wrote a paper on it, going through all the evidences. But the point is, we're not there yet, right? This movement has not got to that point. And then Paneum, when that message is going to be empowered. Now, and we also know that there's the King of the North and the King of the South that are connected with that. And so we don't even particularly know exactly how that relates. So there's some relationship between the King of the North and the King of the South, because Raphia and Paneum are both the North and the South. And so we've had Russia and the United States, we've had the Democrats and the Republicans, but there's some lack in our understanding about how that really relates to midnight and the midnight cry. So whether it's two different ideologies, but they're enemies, they're not godly powers, right? So there's lots we don't understand yet. And what part our understanding plays in how these things unfold, we still don't know. But that's kind of where we want, what we want to do when we're addressing these lines. We need to keep all of this in mind. Any questions about any of this so far?
No, but I really like the review, especially the things that need to happen before the Sunday law.
Yeah. So when we're going to deal with this, because right now we put this, we'll say it's a proposal. I propose that somehow First Samuel chapter 2 is addressing this line in our history, and the question is, like, if we're going to put it there, how do we relate it to other lines? So that's what I want to do on the bottom. which I guess we'll have to do tomorrow. But we already had started to do that, in that we saw that we had taken some of this story, that maybe we need more to go further through First Samuel before we really grasp it all. So I'm not certain what to do on that. And some of this, like we haven't really dealt with any of the Hebrew numbers in any kind of detail other than we dealt with the ephod, right? So we had, right, the ephod, which was 646, the Hebrew number 646, which we know is connected to our lines in some way, right? That's 646 years from July 27th, 1299 to Hiroshima, right? So that's on the biblical calendar, 26th day of the fourth month. So, and so that relates to our understanding of Revelation 9 and so forth, the symbols attached to that. And that was one of the things connected with July 18th. So we still have to try to understand how these are going to fit in this structure. So somewhere in this this story, there's something that relates to our prediction about July 18th. So even in that line here, the one at the top, which is the same as the one at the bottom. But when we start, there's still more dates that need to go in here that we have to get from this story. So I'm not really sure exactly how to approach it. Like some of this analysis is going to take quite a bit of time to really figure it out. I know there's some things I had done with some of this analysis that I got to go through again. So maybe I'll try to get some of that ready tomorrow. Because I don't want to just... What's that, Kelly?
Would you mind just quickly going over the line that you have here on the screen, December 21, 2012, and so on. What happened at those dates?
Okay, so December 21st, 2012, that's the beginning of the 777 chiasm. So that 2,391 days.
No, just tell me what they are. Don't explain it. Just tell me what they are.
Well, December 21st, 2012 is the beginning of this. It's the Mayan prediction. Okay. It's supposed to end.
Beginning of the 777.
Yeah, it's beginning of the 777.
September 23rd. And September. Go left to right for me, please.
That's 777 days before November 9th, 2019. And that is the failed prediction of the evangelicals that the secret rapture was supposed to happen on that date.
Okay.
But I'm also at Lambert Church presenting July 18th as a symbol of the prediction before midnight on that date. And it's going to be the first day. It's going to be Rosh Hashanah on the biblical calendar, right?
And then September 23rd, 2017.
That's the one I'm talking about, September 23rd, 2000. And then October.
The failed Protestant rapture prediction? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then October 13th, 2018, that was a predicted date by Daniel from Brazil, that the midnight cry would be given by Parminder Ortiz in Lambert Church, but he ended up doing the presentation. And then I measured from noon when he was doing the presentation. I did the calculation actually at noon and counted 391 and a half days to midnight on November 9th, 2019. It says 392 days, but it's 391.5.
And is that kind of what Jeff was thinking about in the quote that I posted in the chat? And is that also when people were thinking they were going to be sinless or whatever? Stop sinning, I mean?
Yeah, that close of probation would be November 9th, 2000. Yeah, for the priests, and that let him that is righteous, though, which I opposed right from the beginning.
Do you think that's Do you think that's kind of what Jeff was thinking when he said those things?
No,
Probation was about to close, and we need to wake up, and the Sunday Trump is
maybe
going to be
it
Trump will
could
be
be.
disposed or
I don't know.
impeached, and
Yeah, I don't. I'd have to.
it was
Yeah,
just before that, October 19th, 2019, or October 9th, or I forget.
yeah. And then we got 777 days to December 25th, 2021, the end of our structure that we had for the November 9th, July 18th, December 25th. So there's more to that structure, but 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 that's the end of the whole structure. So we're just saying that this message of First Samuel addresses this particular understanding within this movement related to time that was revealing the problems in the movement. That is, this movement had in it the sons of Belial, that is, they're worthless people, right? People that are not aware of that they're mishandling God's word, they're misrepresenting God, yet they're standing in this place as supposedly supposed to be representing God. And that's what I believe this line illustrates, this story of Samuel illustrates this movement, this history in that time.
And
So
sons of Belial being Eli's two sons, or
yeah,
more than that, right? Yeah.
yeah. So the
Yeah.
pugilist and the mouth of the serpent, which describes the character of people in the movement in that time.
Definitely Parminder,
Yeah, and others, right?
I'm sure.
I mean, you could put Mark Bruce as the pugilist and Parminder as the mouth of the serpent if you want.
Yeah, yeah, that fits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's just generally a characteristic of us in this movement at that time. And so the message that was to correct this was a message in relation to time that was brought in by Parminder, but then God gave light as a witness against what Parminder was teaching using time, right? So the reason why, I was here, I was a part of the movement was to expose Parminder, his teaching, and so there was this conflict between what Parminder was teaching and what I was teaching in regard to time, and then that just manifested itself in the July 18, 2020 prediction, which was still misused, right? Still misunderstood. But it was a test to us. So November 9th ended up separating the false priests from the movement, Parminder's group and so forth. But July 18th was meant to reprove us and correct us. And so, we saw that when we went through the book of Judges, but we're just going to have to come back to this tomorrow. Yeah, and the 2,391 days, Stephen mentions that it's actually on October 22nd, 2391 BC, that the flood began. That's when the door of the ark was closed. It was on October 22nd, 2391 BC. So, yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Stephen. Okay, well, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the study here this morning. I pray for each person that you can bless them today. I'm thankful because here in Canada it's Thanksgiving, but I'm always thankful. And I just pray that you can bless each person as they seek your presence each day. And bring us together again to study your word. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.